Everyone. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Stelter, Executive Vice President of the Stelter Company. It's great to have all you here and appreciate you taking time today. Thank you for joining us for the webinar. It's titled Winds of Change and Organizational Shift in Non-Cash Assets Fundraising, presented by Jackie Franey, Director of Gift Planning Fundraising at the Nature Conservancy. I'll get back to introducing Jackie in just a minute, but first I'd like to say just a few words about our webinar series. As an industry leader in plan giving marketing, Stelter is committed to providing innovative solutions and education for our industry. We're happy to host this complimentary webinar today, as well as a whole slate of webinars throughout the year. Today's webinar is the 6th in our 2021 series, and later this year you'll hear from presenters like Jen Shang, who teaches us how to love our donors. Adrian Sargent shares advice from his 25 years of research on how to build donor loyalty, and Margaret Holman gives us tips on how to use plan gifts to solve donor problems. You can register for all of our webinars on our website at stelter.com/webinars, and be sure to keep an eye on your inboxes for invitations to all of our webinars throughout the year. So now back to today's webinar and our presenter, Jackie Franey. Jackie is the Director of Gift Planning Fundraising at the Nature Conservancy and is directly responsible for the management and leadership of an experienced and big fundraising team that has raised $1.2 billion in plan gifts during the Our World campaign. She has almost 30 years of experience in plan giving, serving as the Director of Plan Giving for the American Heart Association National Center for 10 years, as well as Community Foundations of Texas and Children's Medical Center. She is a certified plan giving specialist and a chartered advisor in philanthropy. She has served on the editorial advisory board of Plan Giving Today, the national board for the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, and on the steering committee for the Leadership Institute of CGP. She was inducted into the CGP Hall of Fame in 2020 and is one of the true leaders and experts in our field, and we're really, really happy to have her today. So with that, Jackie, I'll hand it to you and really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Jeremy, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this research and data from the Nature Conservancy around non-cash asset fundraising. And so I'd like to highlight the goals for today's presentation, and there's 3. The first is to empower you to continue to have deliberate conversations with donors regarding giving from wealth, so from assets rather than disposable income, cash. The second is to equip all of you to have some data and research findings from the Nature Conservancy to strategically grow your program and close more transformational gifts. What we find is that by sharing the research, because we're such a large organization and the data, that it can help build the case for support of focusing more and more on non-cash asset conversations with your donors. And then the third thing is to enable you to navigate the challenges to shift the organizational culture to non-cash assets fundraising. We know, because we experience it at TNC, and many of you also experience, the conversations that say, we don't need to talk to our donors about non-cash assets. They know how to give. I'm not going to have this conversation with this high net worth donor because they have a bevy of professional advisors. And by assuming that donors know how to give, we miss the opportunity to engage them in conversations around how they can give to our organization besides just funding their gifts with cash. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And before we get into the data, what I'd like to do is, and I'm having trouble advancing to the next slide. There we go. So what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the gift planning program at the Nature Conservancy. And this data that I'm going to share, both from the campaign and the data that's on the slide right now, is through June 30th of 2020, so the ending of our last fiscal year. So the first important thing to know about the Nature Conservancy is right now we have over 29,000 Legacy Club members, and our average Legacy Club gift is about $322,000. The second piece about the work that we do is that last year we brought in $165 million in realized plan gifts, and that was a record for us. For this fiscal year, which ended June 30th of 2021, we are above that $165 million and we'll have another record year. And one of the things that is important about our realized plan giving income is the fact that it's one of the largest pools of revenue that's undesignated. So it's a substantial amount of money that helps us to further our conservation work. And then the third piece about the Nature Conservancy is last year, our Gift Planning Fundraising Department raised just over $200 million in deferred gifts. And this included complex gifts, revocable gifts, future deferred gifts to the organization. And in order to achieve these incredible numbers year over year, we are supported by 74 staff members within our gift planning department. Now what I'd like to do is touch on what our gift planning house looks like in our gift planning department. So we have really 5 pillars within our department: Legacy Club and Stewardship and Engagement, our Gift Planning Fundraising and Philanthropic Advisory Services, our Loyal Donor Fundraising and Stewardship, Trustee Engagement, and our coaching and support to our field fundraisers. And within those 5 pillars, we also have underneath that, supporting all the work that we do, our systems, our marketing and communications of all our planned gifts, our gift administration to manage all those gifts, and of course, the people that make all this happen. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on 2 of the pillars in this system and in our gift planning department. The first is our gift planning, fundraising, and philanthropic advisors. And so what that comprises of in the gift planning department is our gift planning officers, our regional gift strategists, and our philanthropic advisor. Our gift planning officers work with our donors on revocable gifts, such as beneficiary designations and bequests, and also charitable gift annuities. And they work one-on-one with donors and the field to close those gifts. Our second group, which is our regional gift strategists, cover geographical territories for our chapters and work closely with our donors and our field fundraisers and our field leadership to work on all planned gifts plus non-cash asset gifts, whether it's funding an outright gift for a major gift, a principal gift, it's a blended gift, it's a planned gift. So there's a vast array of complex gifts that the regional gift strategists work on. And then the third component is our philanthropic advisor. And Greg works with our top tier donors, our principal gift donors at the $5 million and plus level, plus our global board and our trustees. The second pillar that is involved in the work that we're doing on non-cash asset fundraising is our coaching and support. And this is really working closely with, mainly through our regional gift strategist and our philanthropic advisor, to work with our fundraising colleagues, both principal gift officers, our field fundraisers, to help assist with any gifts that involve non-cash asset, complex gift, donor strategy, how to talk to a donor about how they would like to fund their gift. And by doing this coaching and support, we are really focusing on non-cash asset fundraising and having strategic, holistic conversations with every donor that is interested in making a major or a principal gift to TNC.
Jackie, this is Jen. I can just tell you're having problems advancing the slides. So if you just want to say next, I'll go ahead and advance them for you.
That would be great. Next.
Okay.
Thank you. So one of the things that as we work with our regional gift strategists and talk about non-cash asset fundraising that has been so successful with our partners at TNC is back in 2016, we made a deliberate shift in how we referred to our regional gift strategists. And so what we really focused on was talking about that these are technical experts in non-cash assets and complex gifts, instead of just referring to our regional gift strategists as plan giving experts. And what that started to do in fiscal year 16 and to the present day is position these regional gift strategists to not just be called in when a field fundraiser or a fundraising colleague was working on a plan gift or a blended gift that had a plan giving component to it, but to reach out to the regional gift strategist anytime they were working with a donor that was interested in funding a major or principal gift, to strategize around how to fund that gift. So it became a collaborative partnership with field fundraisers, with senior leaders, with chapter fundraisers, and leadership within the chapters to collaboratively work together and make available our team, not just for planned gifts, but any gift that involved donor strategy about how the donor was going to fund their gift. Next slide, please. And so that's a little bit of information about TNC and our gift planning department. Before we get into the data, what I'd like to do is touch on Russell James, and for several reasons. We all know that he is a rock star, and his research has been instrumental in helping us to really focus on non-cash asset fundraising. And to give a little background, Russell James started working with TNC back in about 2014, 15, when I joined the organization, and I reached out to Russell to ask him if he would share some of his research with our senior leadership, you know, around how donors think, around how donors give. And so we started a relationship with Russell. Well, of course, back in 2018, Russell focused on his groundbreaking research around the analysis of 1 million nonprofit tax returns and looking at how donors were funding their gifts, whether it was cash, it was non-cash. And as we all know, just as a reminder, a few of the results from that research. One thing was that nonprofit organizations who consistently receive gifts such as stock and bonds grew their contributions 6 times faster than those organizations that only received cash. The second thing that Russell's research showed was that non-cash gifts predicted the long-term fundraising growth of an organization, and that organizations that raise gifts of non-cash assets grew their total contributions much faster than those raising only gifts of cash. The third thing that Russell talked about, and he referred to this as the mental framing. So when fundraisers ask for cash, they are asking from the small bucket. They are asking from disposable income instead of thinking from the large bucket of assets. And so as Russell was releasing this research in 2018, and we were starting to do some of the data review and source selection of our data, Russell came to our organization and shared with our senior leaders about this research that helped reinforce how important it is to not make assumptions that donors know how to give, and not make assumptions that, you know, donors, even if they have professional advisors, are going to think about giving a non-cash asset instead of just writing a check or making a multi-year pledge to give cash to our organizations. And so between the data that we've compiled and Russell's research, and then also other research such as from Fidelity, the study of their high net worth donors, talking about that donors have non-cash assets, they have retirement plans, but in many cases, they haven't thought about giving those assets to our organization. This reinforced that cash is not king and that we really need to be having deliberate conversations with donors around how would you like to make your gift, and not just assuming that donors know. Next slide, please. And of course, just to keep everybody kind of on the same page about non-cash assets, I just thought it would be helpful. Everybody's seen this data, but to share, and we share this internally this is from the Federal Reserve, but there's all kinds of, different overviews of American wealth. But basically from the Federal Reserve, that donors and individuals hold their wealth primarily in non-cash assets. From this Federal Reserve March survey, 81% of donors hold their asset in stocks and bonds and retirement accounts and mutual funds and real estate, and only about 19% is held in cash equivalents, and personal property. So when we think about the fact that the majority of donors hold their asset in non-cash assets, and we couple that with Russell's research, and we couple that with not assuming that donors know how to give, there's enormous opportunity to have conversations with donors around non-cash asset giving. Next slide, please. So now this leads into the Our World campaign. And we wanted to look at actually how were donors giving to our campaign. And since we were in the middle of a 7-year campaign that started in fiscal year 14 and again ran for 7 years, we wanted to raise more than $4 billion. And we were going to have lots of donors giving to our campaign. We thought we would look at the data and analyze how were our donors giving so that we could get a sense of where we were in a watermark of how many of our donors that were major gift donors and principal gift donors were giving assets instead of cash. So the first thing that we did is we created 2 dashboards that were broken up into, number one, major gift donors, which TNC defines as contributions of $100,000 to $4.99 million. And during the life of the campaign, we had almost $1.7 billion worth of gifts that came in the form of major gifts. On the flip side, we had approximately $1.4 billion from donors that were considered principal gifts. And for TNC, that's a donor that's contributing $5 million or more to the campaign. Next slide, please. So the other thing that we needed to do as we were slicing and dicing and analyzing the data around the campaign is realize how donors give. So we know that donors give individually, and the donors also give through private foundations, corporations, and other things like donor advised funds. And Jen, if you could just hit the button until you get yeah, so right there is perfect. Thank you. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to focus on individuals. So if a private foundation or an entity like the Kellogg Foundation gave a gift to us or we received a grant, we pulled that information out of the data that I'm going to show you on the next few slides. Because gifts that come from private foundations, that come from trusts and donor advised funds, as we all know, usually arrive in cash. So we didn't want to skew the enormous amount of gifts that we were getting in cash from these entities in looking at how individuals were giving. The other thing that we did in looking at the data was we also pulled out realized planned gifts. As many of you all do in campaigns, and TNC also does, is that gifts that came in from realized planned gifts, so donors that were campaign donors that died during the campaign and made a gift of $100,000 was included in the total amount that we raised during our World campaign. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to extract those realized gifts because the majority of them came in cash, and that would have skewed the numbers around us looking at how individuals give. So let's look at individuals. And Jen, if you could hit the dots so that I have the 4 circles at the bottom. So perfect. So we also know that individuals, major gift donors and principal gift donors, can give individually, through a private foundation, through a corporation, or through a public charity. So individually is defined as they would write a check, they would give stock, they would give real estate, but that they would individually give that asset to TNC. A private foundation in this context is defined as an individual's private foundation. So they decided that they had the Smith Family Fund, and so they were going to give that gift through their foundation. Some donors wanted to give through their corporation, and then some wanted to give individually, but they decided to use the mechanism of either a donor advised fund, such as Fidelity, or a community foundation to make their gift. So let's flip to the next slide and see an example of Mr. Smith. And Jen, if you could hit the 4 buttons again, so I have the 4 circles at the bottom. So Mr. Smith is a major gift donor to our campaign, and he's defined as that because his total giving is $4 million. And through the conversations that a staff person has with Mr. Smith about how he would like to give, the decision is made that he's going to give multiple ways. So the first thing is he decides to write a check for $1 million. So that goes into the individual giving bucket. And then Mr. Smith decides that he wants to make a grant recommendation out of his family foundation and gives another $1 million. And obviously that's going to be cash. The third way that Mr. Smith decides to give is through his Smith Salmon Corporation, and that also is $1 million given in cash. And then Mr. Smith finally decides that his final $1 million will be given through his donor advised fund that he has at the local community foundation. So as we looked at the data, which we're going to take a look at on the next screens, that we not only looked at individually how donors were giving, but also how that individual gave within their spheres of giving platforms. So if you could go to the next slide. So this is an example of breaking down all of the information of how our donors gave. And I think right after this, we're going to take a moment for some questions, because this is a lot of data that we've kind of narrowed down into one slide. So let me see if I can do justice in sharing the information. So what we did is we looked at the percent of gifts received by account type. So on the left-hand side, you have those different buckets of how an individual donor could give. So did they give individually, like Mr. Smith wrote a check for $1 million? Did Mr. Smith, he gave through his private foundation or a trust? And then did Mr. Smith give through a public charity or his donor advised fund? So those were the 3 levels of individuals and how they decided to make their gifts to the campaign. Then we looked at the differences between principal gift donors. How did they make their gifts? And so as you can see, for donors that gave gifts of $5 million and above, almost 60% of them, 58% gave individually. 28% decided to give through their family foundation or a private foundation or a trust. And then 14% gave through either a public charity or through a corporation. And then looking at the donors that were major gift donors, those again that gave gifts of $100,000 to $4.99 million, you see a lot of the same thing, only more than 75%, so more than 3/4 of the donors that were able to give a gift between $100,000 and almost $5 million gave their gifts individually. They were writing checks, maybe they gave us some securities, in some cases they gave us some real estate, but the majority of them gave individually. And this area, both those 77% of donors at the major gift level, and then the $5 million donors, the 58% that gave at the individual level, we saw that those two groups as enormous opportunity to continue to have conversations around the how of giving, because so many of our donors, as you'll see in a future slide, still gave cash. And so this is where we've shared a wonderful opportunity in TNC to say, not only are we raising a significant amount of money, but if we continue to have strategic, holistic conversations with donors around how they should be giving, so talking to them about, did you know that you could give real estate or that you could give securities? And having those systematic conversations and sharing with donors opportunities in proposals or asks. That's a one-pager that talks about the multitude of ways that you can make a gift using non-cash assets. We know that we can encourage more and more of our major and our major and our principal gift donors to give non-cash assets. So to continue with this information, we also had about 12% of our major donors that gave through a private foundation or a trust. And then about 11% of them gave through a public charity, like a donor advised fund or a corporation. And one of the things that we also focused on with these donors that gave through a private foundation, whether they gave a principal gift or a major gift, was also to talk to the donors about, that's interesting that you're thinking about giving through a private foundation, and talk to them about, instead of giving their asset to the private foundation and then gifting a grant recommendation to us, that if they had not already gifted those assets to their private foundation, to talk to them about the tax benefits and the how it may be a little more tax advantage for them to give those assets directly to TNC. So we're encouraging our field fundraisers and our colleagues that work with our donors, both at the principal and the major gift level, to talk to our donors about maybe thinking about giving the assets directly to TNC instead of directly through their private foundation or even their donor advised funds. How many donors do we know that give non-cash assets to a donor advised fund and then they make their grants out of those types of DAFs, when instead we can talk to those donors about gifting that security or another type of non-cash asset directly to TNC, because we have such a sophisticated fundraising shop. So let me just show one more slide. Jen, if you could go to the next slide. Oh, let's take questions before we go to the next one. So do we have some questions?
We do. Yeah, we have a couple questions. They are more general than specific to what you just talked about. We'll go ahead and cover them now. And then I just would like to remind people that you can send questions in send it in through the Q&A, and we'll have some time after her next slide to answer those. But for now, Tanya would like to know, what system do you use to track your gift planning?
So when you say system, I am assuming that you mean CRM, which is the fundraising
Software,
Is that
yeah.
correct? Yes. So we use that software. We have a multitude of reports that we use to track, the gift annuities, the revocable gifts that we're closing. And so, we have a whole group of data and analysts that help us to track this information. So we literally, both for this information we're sharing today and just our planned gifts, we go into BBCRM and pull out all kinds of statistical information on all the gifts that we're closing year to year.
We have another person asking, there was a slide earlier that displayed the percentage of American wealth in cash versus non-cash assets, and they're wondering where DAFs would fall in that.
So that's a great question. And so, my understanding of the Federal Reserve information is looking at the actual assets that people own. So real estate, securities, their businesses. And so a DAF is a giving platform. So the Federal Reserve is really looking at those assets instead. I don't have the statistics on how much money we have in DAFs as a unit, as a nationwide, but we can get that statistic if you'd like to see that number.
Okay, let's cover one more. We do have some people sending some in, so we'll do one more right now, and then we'll cover the rest in just a minute. Jim would like to know, what have you found is the demographic age of donors that is most likely to give non-cash assets?
Well, I don't have at my fingertips right now, and we haven't done research on the age of donors. So when we looked at our donors that were giving cash versus non-cash, we did not look at the age of the donor because in a lot of cases we don't have that information. But what I'm going to, use an analysis of or a guess of is that because there are so many donors, 65 and older, and an enormous amount of non-cash assets, and the wealth is held in our older generations, that's where the majority of non-cash assets are coming from. But I would say, regardless of the age demographics of the propensity for donors to give, older donors may feel more comfortable giving their assets away than younger donors, is that it just depends on each donor's own personal financial situation. So that's why it's important to talk to every donor about opportunities to give non-cash assets, because you could have a donor that's 35, they made, an enormous amount of money through, selling their company, or they're getting ready to sell it, or they've done really well in the stock market, and they're very willing to make a non-cash asset gift. And then you could have older donors that may be more comfortable, holding on to their assets and giving cash and waiting until death to give their non-cash assets through planned gifts through their estate planning. So again, we did not do that analysis on the age of donors. That may be a Russell James question that he can easily answer.
Sure. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go to your next slide, and I'll look through the rest of the questions that are coming in.
Perfect. So this is a visual representation of our entire campaign and how donors gave. So on the left-hand side, you have the percent of revenue, and then you have for each fiscal year from fiscal year 14 through fiscal year 17, so the 7 years of the campaign. Each bar is color-coded. So the light blue is all the gifts at the 100,000 to 4.99 million plus gifts of 5 million and above. So all the gifts from major and principal gift donors during our campaign and how they gave. So if they gave cash, it was the light blue bar. If they gave property, real estate in this case, it was the dark green. And if they gave securities, it was the light green. And this campaign, these dollars exclude realized plan giving revenue, again, because the majority of that money comes from cash. So as you can see in the early, part of the campaign, we had some nice gifts that were given in stock and a few in real estate gifts, but the majority was given in cash. We had a really great year in fiscal year 15, where we had many, many $100,000 gifts that were given through gifts of stock. And then we circled fiscal year 17, because that was really the start of, back in 2016, as I mentioned earlier, we really made this shift with our regional gift strategist to talk about more of not just that our regional gift strategists were available to talk about planned giving and planned gifts, but that any non-cash asset. So we were spending a lot of time with our colleagues, our field fundraisers, to talk about non-cash asset. And it really demonstrated and showed in fiscal year 17, where we got an enormous amount of gifts in stock, and we had several gifts that came through real estate gifts to the organization. And then in fiscal year 18 and 19, again, it bounced around, but we still continued to get a large number of gifts in stock. And again, in fiscal year 19, we had a large number of gifts that came through real estate. In fiscal year 20, again, as a reminder, a couple of things are impacting that fiscal year. So number one, we had the CARES Act. So I want to preface it by saying, while talking to our donors about non-cash asset fundraising is really critically important, and it continues to be, we're also aware that with the CARES Act, both in 2020 and 2021, that there were many donors that, even though we sat down with them and talked about non-cash asset fundraising, that because of their personal financial circumstances, that they found that it was better to make a cash gift because of the CARES Act. So that was one thing that was influencing some of the numbers in part of fiscal year 19 and then fiscal year 20. And then the other thing for the bar for fiscal year 20 was also that this was just 6 months of the year, because our campaign ended in June of 2020. So that's an overview of all of our data for the campaign. And one of the things that I would say as you look at this data and for your own organizations and also for TNC and how we're messaging this, is there's an enormous opportunity to continue to have non-cash asset conversations with donors. And what we're doing at TNC is really focusing on, with every donor strategy session, with every coaching session, with a field fundraiser, with a principal gift colleague, with a major gift officer, that we're encouraging conversations either directly with that donor, where we would bring a regional gift strategist in to talk about the how of giving and the various types of non-cash assets that a donor could use to fund their gift, or working directly with that field fundraiser to get them comfortable with talking about gifts of securities, high-level gifts of real estate, talking about if it's a business owner, if they're getting ready to sell their business, and being available as a partner with that field fundraiser to be able to prepare them to have conversations with their donors. So while this is, we see this as great news because we're raising an enormous amount of money, and we can be raising an enormous larger amount of money if we continue to focus on talking to donors about non-cash asset fundraising and how they could give appreciated assets, how they can take advantage of, bypassing capital gains, all those double tax benefits from stopping and thinking about funding their gifts with something besides cash. So I'm going to take a pause here, Jen, and see if we have other questions.
Yeah, we sure do, actually. We've got quite a few in here. So I think we can probably wrap up the program with the questions. And if Jeremy wants to join us again, that would be wonderful. And my apologies if you did cover some of this, excuse me, while you were just speaking, as I was looking through and I couldn't really pay attention to what you were saying, but we have a lot of people that are asking about DAFs. And the main question seems to be, basically, what are the benefits of giving an asset to the nonprofit directly versus giving it to the DAF? What are the benefits for the nonprofit and what are the benefits for the donor?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to kind of put on my hat of, I used to work for one of the largest community foundations in the country for approximately 6 years. And I worked with donors of high net worth that were interested in making gifts of $5 million and plus. So I really got to experience donors sharing why they would use a DAF as opposed to giving directly to a nonprofit, or what the benefits were of doing one or the other. And so some of the things to think about are, for an organization such as TNC that's really big and really sophisticated, we can handle any kind of non-cash asset. So it's really talking to donors about what their preference is. Sometimes making a non-cash asset gift to a DAF is a timing issue. The donor wants to give that asset to the DAF, get their charitable deduction, and then kind of take a little time to figure out what charities they want to support. And in that realm, a DAF may be the best opportunity for that donor. In some cases, there's not a timing issue, and a donor may come to, for example, the Nature Conservancy, and they want to give real estate. Well, we're very experts at accepting gifts of real estate, but so we could accept that gift, or the donor could, give that real estate to a DAF. But if it's a small organization or an organization that is a little nervous about accepting gifts of real estate, or maybe your senior leadership or your finance department or your legal department does not want to accept gifts of real estate, then a DAF is really a best way to get that gift to an into a charitable platform, and then be able to support an organization. The other reason may be a donor may decide, well, I have a vacation home and I don't need to use this vacation home anymore, but I want to use, and it's worth $1 million, but I want to support 5 organizations with this $1 million. And I can't, give 1/5 to 5 organizations. So sometimes using a DAF in having the community foundation or, like Fidelity DAF manage taking that asset and then, selling it is the appropriate way to go, and then gifting it out to specific organizations. So there's a lot of reasons why donors would use a DAF or give to a nonprofit directly. But what I would say, having both been working for a community foundation and working for a single mission organization like the Nature Conservancy, is I would ask, as you're working with donors, how do you like to make your philanthropic gifts? What platform do you use? And the donor may say, well, I give through my DAF and I have a family foundation. And then you can ask questions about, receiving a gift through a donor advised fund, or, if you're a sophisticated organization and the donor's talking about a non-cash asset, like real estate that your organization accepts, you can talk to that donor about, well, we accept real estate, and if you'd like to give it directly to us. Again, it's really just great to have those conversations with donors, and it really depends on, I hate to use the word sophistication, but depending on what the asset is that the donor wants to give that's non-cash assets, your organization may be better served by working hand in hand with a donor advised fund to help get that gift eventually to support your organization. I hope that helped answer the question.
I think
That's
so.
great.
And if not, people can write in. Jeremy, did you have a question?
Yeah, another question up here, Jackie, from Christine. What's the Nature Conservancy's ratio of technical expertise staff to major and principal gift officers for coaching conversations specifically?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'm going to answer it instead of saying percentages. So we have, as all of you may know, at the Nature Conservancy, we have chapters in every state. And so every state has fundraising staff, directors of philanthropy, associate directors of philanthropy, all kinds of positions that are major gift fundraisers, principal gift fundraisers. And so looking out across the organization, there's a lot of our fundraising staff that are in the field working in chapters that have been doing major gift and principal gift fundraising for a long time. So they have expertise in working on gifts of security. A lot of people have that. Some gifts of real estate. When you get into the more sophisticated gifts, it's a smaller percentage of staff across the country. And so what our team does is our regional gift strategists and our gift planning officers, but primarily our regional gift strategists and our philanthropic advisor, who works with all of our field fundraisers and our centralized principal gift officers, who are very, very capable in all kinds of non-cash asset gifts. But our centralized regional gift strategists are specifically hired to have non-cash asset fundraising experience. So while our field has experience, the depth and breadth of the regional gift strategists goes much, much deeper because they're dealing with non-cash assets every day.
I think that kind of goes to a couple of questions I'm seeing here from Robert and Casey. Robert's asking how comfortable your regional gift advisors are with talking about the personal and financial planning topics. And then also kind of what your team structure is, how they work together when a non-cash asset gift is identified.
Great. It's a great question. And so I have to say, I am so grateful to be working with a group of fundraisers on our team that is so sophisticated in the knowledge of not only non-cash assets, but many of them are JDs, CSPs, have held licenses on, managing all kinds of different assets, working with gifts of insurance, working with closely held, businesses, being able to sit with a donor and talk about their finances, not just the asset, but really the overall finances and estate planning of a donor. So if they're using, a REIT, or they're using a, revocable trust, or they set up an insurance trust, anything like that, our team is really knowledgeable about individually. And then they work collectively together. So there may be a time where there's a donor that's getting ready to sell their business, and they want to, consider gifting closely held securities. So one of our regional gift strategists may be working on that gift, and they may pull in other regional gift strategists. We have weekly meetings where the team gets together and just talks about really interesting gifts. And I've been in gift planning for 30 years, and I have to say, I learn something new from my team every day on the technical aspects of financial estate planning. And one of the things that we did during the pandemic that I think probably a lot of big organizations did, and probably a lot of people on this call did, was because our regional gift strategists understood the CARES Act, understood legislative changes, even right now, all the potential changes with DAFs, like our team is knowledgeable about that. We coach and share on different calls, development calls with the field, with each other about the trends, cutting edge, what's going on, so that our field fundraisers always have just a phone call away this depth and breadth of plan giving expertise at their fingertips on all types of gifts. And then obviously, if there's a gift we need assistance with, there's so many people in the plan giving community outside of TNC that we can tap into to help us with gifts.
That's great. Thanks, Jackie. There's quite a few questions on here, Jackie, about cryptocurrency and crypto program. And they're wondering, have you established a crypto program? Have you seen an uptick in those gifts?
So I have to say that I am not the expert on cryptocurrency in our organization. Many of you may know Greg Sharkey, who is our philanthropic advisor, and he is really the expert on cryptocurrency. I would say there has been an uptick in interest in cryptocurrency, but if whoever or those that ask the question want more information about what TNC is doing, I will probably refer those questions to Greg. But like every other organization, we have one person that really is focused on keeping apprised of it, because it is just an interesting asset that is getting a lot of attention right now. How's that for not answering a question?
I get good answer. Greg Sharkey's the guy to go to. There's been a couple of requests in here, Jackie, for the one pager you referenced about how can you make a gift using non-cash assets. Would you be willing to share that to the group?
I don't think there would be any problem sharing that. And what I can do, Jeremy, is share it with you after our session here. I would also say that at the national conference, Ed Cadogan and I are going to be doing a presentation around the culture of philanthropy, and we probably will be sharing that information there too. But I'll be happy to share that one pager so you can see what we use.
Okay. And what I'll do with that, Jackie, is once we have the recording, I'll put the recording, the handouts, and then that one pager on our website, and there'll just be links for people to download those things. So that would be wonderful. We have Dan asking, how do you share fairly and equitably the revenue production between your various teams?
That's a great question. So I think one of the things that makes TNC gift planning, the whole department, and specifically my team of the gift planning fundraising team so successful is that we share credit. So for example, if we are working on a major gift of $4 million and a field fundraiser has that donor in their portfolio, so it's somebody, it's a donor that's in Iowa, and if the field fundraiser in Iowa calls our regional gift strategist that covers that territory and says, I have a donor that's interested in gifting $1 million. They're, considering some non-cash assets. Can we have a conversation? Can you go and visit with me with that donor? And so over the course of that donor strategy, closing that gift, at the time that that gift closes, the field fundraiser is able to say in their chapter that they closed $1 million gift, whatever the non-cash asset was. And then our team also tracks that $1 million gift closed that they were substantially involved in closing. Same thing for, you know, CRTs or planned gifts. There's dual credit. Credit is shared freely, so there isn't any concern about, you know, who gets the credit in a fundraising environment. And we find that that builds such a collaborative partnership with the field, with our team, and it just, you know, helps the donor because there isn't any concern about, you know, who's going to get credit for the gift.
We have someone that's asking if you could recommend some resources that organizations could contact to have the level of technical expertise that you have in-house at TNC, partners for nonprofits who have limited expertise in-house right now.
So my short answer would be, you know, using, you know, people like Jeremy and the Stelter company, right? And using consultants and going to the CGP conferences and listening to presentations. You know, I am not the one that can answer that question as well as Jeremy. You and your team can, because that's what you do, right? You help to provide to individuals all those resources. So I would go back to, you know, reach out not only to people like you at Stelter, but also we have such a wonderful plan giving community that, you know, reaching out to folks that have a lot of experience and, you know, saying, hey, what are you doing at your organization? Or can you share materials, you know, with me? I found that over the years, that's one of the things about, you know, gift planning fundraising is that everyone is so willing to share information and resources. So that's what I would say to the person asking that question.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Jackie, and I would just add to that, Jackie, you know, tapping into your local plan giving roundtable group would be a great starting point because there's some great local experts that you can really dive into it and work with that can help you with the technical expertise or setting up your program or getting some basics going before you. I mean, obviously TNC has a phenomenal program and a very large program, but you need to start somewhere. So tap into the local resources too.
That's great, Jeremy. And also, just to give Stelter a plug, we do have Lynn Gomer, who anyone on the line that is a client of ours knows that she is our lawyer and our technical expert at Stelter, and she's available to all of our clients to answer any technical questions at any time. So, and she also offers training. So that's something that you could contact us about if you're interested in that. And we are out of time, so I did want to let you all know we still have a couple questions in the queue. If you had something really that you were really wanting Jackie to answer, you can email her. The email address is on the screen right now. You can also reach out to myself or Jeremy if you have questions about the webinar or the series or our products or services, and you can visit us at stelter.com to learn more about us. And then finally, we are recording, so we'll have the recording, I'll have the handouts, and we'll have the one pager that Jackie will share with me on our website at /webinars. That will be there by Friday, but I will be sending out an email to everyone to let you know exactly when it's there. So you can wait for my email. You'll know it's there, or you can just check things out on Friday. And that is what we have for today. Thank you so much. I think we had around 300 people joining us for the last hour. So what a wonderful group of people. Jackie, can't thank you enough for sharing your talent and your expertise with the group. And Jeremy, thanks
welcome.
for filling in.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate everything.
Thanks
Okay,
so much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.